It was late evening when Emily Carter finished her hospital shift. She was tired but happy, smiling at the thought of going home. Her phone buzzed as she walked to her car. It was her father, James Carter. He always called around that time just to make sure she was safe. "Heading home now, Dad," she said softly, starting her car. James could hear the faint sound of the radio in the background and her laughter as she told him about her day. "Drive safe, kiddo," he said before hanging up. It was the last time he heard her voice. The road was quiet that night, the kind of peaceful silence that makes every sound stand out. Emily drove through the familiar route, her headlights slicing through the dark. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed behind her. Her first thought was confusion. She hadn't been speeding. But she remembered what her father always said. "Stay calm. Keep your hands visible." She pulled over, took a deep breath, and rolled down her window. The officer who approached was someone she had never seen before, Officer Derek Miles. His tone was sharp, and his questions didn't sound like normal traffic stop questions. Emily tried to stay polite, answering softly, hoping it would end quickly. But something about the way he looked at her made her uneasy. Minutes passed. Cars drove by, but no one stopped. Then suddenly everything went quiet again. Back at home, James was setting the table for dinner. He had promised Emily her favorite, pasta with extra cheese. He checked the time and smiled. She should have been home by now. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. He tried calling her, but her phone rang endlessly. James felt the first wave of worry. He told himself she might have stopped for gas or coffee, maybe met a friend on the way. But deep down, something felt wrong. He turned on the news, flipping through channels, searching for a distraction. The night dragged on, every tick of the clock growing louder. At 2 a.m., there was a knock at the door. When James opened it, 2 officers stood there. One spoke gently, the other avoided eye contact. "Mr. Carter, we're sorry to inform you that your daughter was involved in an incident tonight." The words blurred in his ears. "An incident," they said again. He asked what kind of incident. They didn't answer directly. One of them handed him a card, said the department would be in touch, and left before he could ask more. James stood there for a long time, not moving. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. He finally sat down, staring at the empty chair across from him. Her chair. Her dinner had gone cold. The next morning, he drove to the police station. He asked to see the report. The officer at the front desk handed him a piece of paper with a few cold lines written on it. Suspected traffic violation. Vehicle lost control. Fatality confirmed. James blinked at the words, trying to make sense of them. None of it sounded like Emily. She was a careful driver. She didn't speed. She didn't take risks. He asked to see the dash cam footage. The officer said it was under review. He asked about witnesses. They said there were none. When he pushed for answers, they told him to wait for the internal report. The tone in their voice felt more like dismissal than sympathy. Days turned into weeks, but no one from the department called him back. Each time he went to the station, they gave him the same line. "It's being investigated." But James had been in the military long enough to recognize when people were hiding something. One evening, as he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee he could barely taste, a neighbor walked by and stopped. "James, I saw something on the local news," she said carefully. They mentioned an officer involved in a controversial stop. The name sounded familiar. James turned on the TV, switched to the late-night report, and froze. A local journalist was talking about a young woman who died during a routine stop that had inconsistencies in the report. The name of the officer flashed on the screen. Derek Miles. The same name printed on Emily's case file. That night, James couldn't sleep. He opened his old footlocker from his service days, his medals, maps, and a photo of him with Emily when she was little. She was sitting on his shoulders, laughing, holding an American flag. He remembered her saying, "I want to help people like you do, Dad." That's why she became a nurse. She wanted to heal, not fight. The next day, he went to the station again, but this time he wasn't calm. "I want answers," he said firmly. "I want to see that video." The officer behind the desk shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, it's confidential." James's voice dropped. "That was my daughter. Nothing about her is confidential to me." Still, they refused. A few days later, he received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a quiet female voice said, "Mr. Carter, I'm a reporter. My name is Sarah. I saw the dashcam video before it was sealed. You deserve to know the truth. James felt his pulse rise. What did you see? He asked. There was a pause. It wasn't an accident, she whispered. She wasn't speeding. The stop wasn't random. I can't say more over the phone, but something is very wrong. The call ended, but her words stayed with him. It wasn't an accident. Those 4 words kept echoing in his mind. He drove to Emily's favorite park that evening, the one where they used to feed ducks when she was little. He sat on the same bench they used to share and stared at the still water. His reflection looked older, heavier, but beneath the grief, a spark had returned to his eyes. He realized the hardest truth of all. No one was going to fight for Emily except him. The world had moved on, but he couldn't. She wasn't just a name in a report. She was his only child, his reason for living. As the sun dipped below the trees, James made a silent promise. He didn't know how long it would take or how much it would cost him, but he would uncover the truth. He owed it to her. That night, he sat at his desk, opened a new notebook, and wrote 3 words on the first page. Find the truth. Then, beneath it, he wrote her name, Emily Carter. He looked around her empty room, still untouched. Her books were neatly stacked, her favorite sweater hanging on the chair, her hospital ID on the desk. It felt like she would walk in any moment and say, "Dad, you're overthinking again." But she wouldn't. As James turned off the light, the house felt colder, but his heart was steady. He didn't have evidence yet, but he had something stronger, a father's certainty. He knew his daughter, and he knew when something didn't add up. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting, buried under paperwork, silence, and fear. James Carter was no longer just a grieving father. He was a man on a mission, and he would not stop until the world knew what really happened that night on that lonely road. The next morning, James woke up before sunrise. The house felt too quiet. He made himself a cup of coffee, but it didn't taste like anything. He sat at the table, staring at Emily's picture on the wall. Her smile looked so alive that for a moment it didn't feel real that she was gone. He whispered, "I'm not stopping, kiddo. I'll find out what they did to you." James started by reading the police report again and again. It said Emily had refused to cooperate, and that the officer acted in accordance with safety procedures. But he knew his daughter. She was calm, polite, and respectful. She would never argue. Something was wrong. He went to the exact spot where the stop had happened. The road was empty now, lined with trees on one side and an open field on the other. He walked slowly, noticing the faint skid marks, the broken glass and the small memorial someone had placed there, a few flowers, a candle, and a handwritten note that read, "We remember you, Emily." James closed his eyes for a moment and let the wind brush against his face. He could almost hear her voice in the breeze. It made his chest tighten. He took a deep breath and looked around again. Something caught his eye. A small store across the road, with a security camera pointing toward the street. He went inside and asked the store owner, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, if the camera had recorded anything from that night. The man hesitated. "I heard about that incident," he said softly. "It was terrible. But a few days later, some officers came and took the footage. Said it was part of their investigation." James frowned. "Did they give you a copy?" The man shook his head. "No, sir. They said they'd return it." "Never did." James thanked him and left, his heart heavy but his mind sharper than ever. He had learned one important thing. The department didn't want that footage seen. That evening, he met with the reporter who had called him, Sarah. They sat in a quiet cafe at the edge of town. She looked nervous, glancing around before speaking. "Mr. Carter, I've been covering police misconduct stories for years. What happened to your daughter fits a pattern I've seen before." James leaned forward. "What pattern?" She sighed. "Certain officers use routine stops as a way to target specific drivers. They pick people who look alone or easy to intimidate. Then they rewrite the report afterward. Sometimes the footage disappears. Sometimes it's edited. But your daughter's case, it's worse. The video clearly shows she wasn't doing anything wrong." James felt his throat tighten. "You've seen the video?" "I did, but only once. I was sent a clip by someone inside the department before it was locked away. When I tried to access it again, the link was gone. The officer, Miles, has a record of complaints, but every single one has been marked unfounded. James sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, "Can you get me that video?" She hesitated. "It's dangerous, Mr. Carter. They watch people who dig too deep. But I'll try." They agreed to stay in touch. As James walked back to his car, he felt a new kind of energy inside him. He was no longer lost. He had a path now. Find the truth and bring it to light. Over the next few days, James began talking to people who lived near the area. Some said they'd seen flashing lights that night. One woman who lived a block away remembered hearing a loud voice shouting, "Step out of the vehicle," followed by silence. Another man said he saw the officer's car parked alone for nearly 20 minutes before other units arrived. Every detail mattered. James wrote everything down in his notebook. He mapped the road, noted the time, and collected each story. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape. One evening, while going through the online database of officers, he found Derek Miles's record. It was shorter than expected, almost too clean. But buried deep in the notes section, he found something odd. A disciplinary review that had been closed without findings. He copied the reference number and saved it. He knew someone who could help, an old friend from his service days now working in cybersecurity. James called him, and within a few hours, his friend sent him a file. "You didn't get this from me," the message said. Inside were internal complaints, 7 in total, filed against Officer Miles over the past 4 years. Every complaint was from drivers of color. Every case was dismissed. James sat there staring at the screen, his fists tightening. "They knew," he whispered. "They knew, and they did nothing." The next day, Sarah called again. Her voice was hurried. "Mr. Carter, meet me tonight. I have something you need to see." They met in the same cafe, but this time she looked shaken. She slid a small USB drive across the table. "Someone inside the department gave this to me. It's the full dash cam recording." James held the small device as if it were something sacred. "Have you watched it?" She nodded, her eyes misty. "Yes, it's hard to watch." "She didn't do anything wrong, Mr. Carter. The stop was fake." He followed her for miles before pulling her over. James's voice trembled. "Why would anyone do that?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but you deserve to see it yourself." That night, James sat at his desk with his laptop. His hands trembled as he plugged in the drive. The screen flickered to life. He saw Emily's car pulling to the side of the road, her turn signal blinking. The timestamp showed she wasn't speeding. Then Officer Miles's car appeared behind hers. The next few minutes were quiet. Too quiet. He watched her talk politely, nodding as the officer spoke. Then her face changed. She looked afraid. The video cut off before showing more. It ended suddenly, like someone had stopped the recording on purpose. James sat frozen. The silence of the room felt heavier than ever. He realized he was holding his breath. Slowly, he pressed his hand to his chest, trying to calm the storm inside him. He knew what he had to do now. This was no longer just about grief. It was about justice. His daughter deserved the truth. The next morning, James drove to the local news station with Sarah. They showed the footage to the head editor, who promised to verify it. "If this is real," the editor said, "we'll take it public." As they left the building, Sarah turned to him. "Once this goes live, there's no turning back." James looked straight ahead. "I don't want to turn back." But before the story could air, strange things began happening. His email stopped sending. His phone received blank messages. Someone followed his car for 2 nights in a row. James didn't scare easily, but he knew a warning when he saw one. Still, he wouldn't stop. He couldn't. He started making backup copies of the video and mailing them to trusted people. He even sent one to his old military contact just in case something happened to him. Every night before sleeping, he looked at Emily's picture and whispered, "I'm getting closer, sweetheart. Just a little longer." By the end of that week, the truth was no longer hidden in his mind. It was sitting on a dozen desks, waiting to come out. The story was ready. The world just needed to hear it, and James Carter was ready to make sure they did. The morning sun rose over the small town, but for James Carter it brought no peace. He hadn't slept properly for days. The image of Emily's last moments kept replaying in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her car on that dark road, the flashing lights and her frightened face in the video. He sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers, notes, and copies of the dashcam footage. His mission was clear now: make the truth impossible to hide. Sarah had called earlier that morning. The news station was reviewing the footage carefully. Their legal team wanted to be sure before going public. It could take a week, she said. James knew patience was important, but each day felt like a mountain. To keep himself focused, he made a list in his notebook titled Truth Steps. Step 1. Collect witness statements. Step 2. Find more proof. Step 3. Protect the evidence. Step 4. Speak to the right people. He began by returning to the neighborhood near the stop site. He met a woman named Mrs. Turner who lived nearby. She was in her 60s and had seen something strange that night. "I was watching TV when I heard tires screech," she said. "I looked out the window and saw flashing lights. It didn't look like an accident. It looked like an argument, but I couldn't hear much. Then everything went quiet." James thanked her and asked if she would be willing to give a statement. She agreed. He recorded her carefully on his phone, making sure her words were clear. Later, he found another person, a man who worked at a gas station 2 miles from the scene. The man said Officer Miles often pulled over young drivers late at night. "People used to talk about him," the man said. "He was rough sometimes, but no one could do anything. He had friends higher up." That comment stayed with James, friends higher up. It explained why the complaints had vanished. He knew from his military days that sometimes silence was the strongest weapon, but he also knew silence could be broken. He spent the next few days gathering more evidence. He printed copies of every document Sarah gave him and stored them in a small metal box. He hid one copy at his old friend's house, one in a locker, and one in a safe deposit box at the bank. One evening, while sitting in his living room, he received a call from a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a man's voice spoke quietly, "Mr. Carter, I work at the precinct. I can't say my name, but I've seen the internal files." Officer Miles's report was rewritten after the incident. The original file was deleted. James gripped the phone. "Deleted? Are you sure?" "Yes, I saw the first draft before it vanished. It said your daughter was calm, cooperative, and not speeding. Then it disappeared, replaced by a different version. Someone higher up ordered it. Can you prove it?" There was silence. Then the man said, "Check the digital backup logs. There's a hidden record of file changes. Ask for the timestamp 2 hours after the incident." That's when they did it. Before James could ask more, the line went dead. He immediately called Sarah. "We have a whistleblower," he said. She agreed to meet at once. Together, they looked up the precinct's online system. It took hours, but finally they found what they were looking for, a record showing that the file had indeed been edited 2 hours after the stop. The user's name was blacked out, but the timestamp remained. "This is it," Sarah whispered. "This proves tampering." That night, James sat by the window looking out at the quiet street. He remembered something Emily once said when she was a teenager. "Dad, when you believe in something, never give up halfway." He smiled faintly. "I'm not giving up, kiddo," he whispered. The next morning, the news station called. They were going live with the story that evening. James felt a rush of emotion, relief, sadness, and fear all mixed together. He knew once it went public, his life would change forever. At 6 p.m., the story aired on national television. The headline read, "Leaked video raises questions about fatal traffic stop." The footage played in part, showing Emily's calm behavior and the suspicious actions of Officer Miles. Millions watched in silence. Social media exploded with messages of support for James and outrage at the department. James sat on his couch watching the broadcast. He didn't move. When the anchor mentioned Emily's name, his eyes filled with tears. It was the first time the world had said her name with truth and respect. The next day, the city was buzzing. Reporters gathered outside the police station. People held signs that read, "Justice for Emily." News vans lined the street. The mayor called for an independent investigation. For the first time, the wall of silence began to crack, but not everyone was happy. James received calls from unknown numbers telling him to stop stirring trouble. One night, he found his car tires slashed. Still, he refused to back down. "They can scare me," he said to Sarah, "but they can't silence the truth." The department finally held a press conference. The police chief stood in front of cameras saying they would review procedures. But James noticed how carefully he avoided saying the officer's name. It made him realize they were still trying to protect one of their own. Sarah wasn't done either. She dug deeper into Miles's history and found that he had once been temporarily suspended in another town before being transferred to this one. The reason had been hidden under administrative review. She shared the details with national journalists. Soon, more stories began to surface. Drivers from the past who had filed complaints against him but were ignored. One of them, a truck driver, even came forward on live TV saying, "That man shouldn't have been on the road." I tried to tell them. James watched each new piece of truth unfold like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. He felt both pain and pride. Emily's story was now everyone's story. A few days later, a civil rights lawyer contacted James offering to represent his case. The lawyer said, "You have enough evidence to open a federal investigation. If we move quickly, we can make sure this never happens again." James agreed. Together, they gathered all the files, videos, and testimonies. The lawyer filed an official complaint, demanding that the officer and the department face legal consequences. News channels began following James everywhere. Some wanted emotional interviews, but he refused to make it about anger. He always said the same words, "This isn't about hate. This is about truth and love for my daughter." As the weeks passed, hearings began in the city hall. The courtroom filled with people, reporters, citizens, and activists. James sat quietly in the front row, wearing Emily's hospital badge pinned to his jacket. When Officer Miles was called to testify, the room grew silent. His lawyer spoke for him most of the time, denying all wrongdoing. But the evidence was clear: the unedited footage, the tampered reports, the witnesses, and the whistleblower's message. Piece by piece, the truth built a wall around the lies. By the end of the session, the judge ordered a full investigation into not just the officer, but also the department's leadership. That night, James returned home and sat on his porch. The air felt lighter. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "They finally saw you, Emily." He imagined her smiling back at him, somewhere peaceful and proud. For the first time since that terrible night, he felt a small bit of calm. The road to justice was still long, but now he wasn't walking it alone. The whole country had joined him. He opened his notebook again and wrote under Truth Steps. Step 5, Justice Begins. He closed the book, knowing there were still challenges ahead. But he also knew something powerful. Truth, once revealed, cannot be buried again, and he would keep walking forward until his daughter's name stood for something greater than tragedy. It would stand for change. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. News cameras flashed, people held signs, and reporters tried to get a glimpse of James Carter as he arrived. He didn't speak, didn't wave. He simply walked up the stairs, his eyes calm but steady. In his hand, he carried Emily's small silver bracelet. He always kept it with him during every hearing. It reminded him of why he was there. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy. The families of other victims filled the seats behind him. Some nodded to him in quiet support. The case had grown larger than just one incident. People across the country were now paying attention, and the Justice Department had decided to open a full federal inquiry. The first day of the hearing was filled with officials giving statements. The department's lawyer tried to defend their actions, saying the stop had followed protocol. But when Sarah took the stand as a witness, her voice was clear and strong. She explained how the footage had been hidden, how internal reports were changed, and how the truth only came out after James refused to stay silent. James watched her with gratitude. He remembered how frightened she had been in the beginning. Now she stood tall, speaking fearlessly for Emily. The next witness was the woman who had lived near the road, Mrs. Turner. She told the court what she heard that night, how the lights had stayed flashing for a long time, and how the official version never made sense. Her words caused the courtroom to stir. Then came the technical evidence, the file log showing the time of the report's changes. When the lawyer displayed the timestamp on the screen, the silence was so deep that every sound of a pen clicking or paper shuffling echoed. The proof was undeniable. The report had been altered 2 hours after the stop. Officer Miles sat across the room, quiet, his expression unreadable. He avoided looking at James, keeping his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. After the session ended, James walked outside. Reporters rushed forward, asking if he had anything to say. He paused for a moment and said softly, "I just want the truth. Nothing else." The video clip of his calm response spread quickly. People respected him not just for his courage, but for his grace. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. He was steady, like a mountain refusing to move. In the days that followed, the case continued. New evidence appeared, documents showing that several past complaints against the same officer had been dismissed without review. More witnesses came forward. Even a retired officer testified that the department had ignored warnings about Miles's behavior. The pressure grew. The police chief was called to testify. When asked why the video had been hidden, he said, "It was a mistake." But no one in the courtroom believed it. Sarah's article the next morning used the headline, "A Mistake That Cost a Life." James read that article while sitting at Emily's grave the next day. The grass was freshly cut and the air was calm. He placed a single white flower on her grave and whispered, "You're still helping people, even now." He remembered the little things about her, how she loved rainy days, how she used to bring home stray animals, how she always believed kindness could change people. He smiled faintly and said, "You were right, Emily. Kindness is powerful, but truth is even stronger." Back in town, the story was now national news. Crowds gathered every day outside the courthouse, carrying candles, photos, and messages of support. People from all walks of life came together: nurses, teachers, veterans, students. Many said they saw their own children in Emily's story. James began receiving letters from across the country. Some were from parents who had lost children in similar situations. Others were from people thanking him for his strength. Every night he read a few letters before bed. Some made him cry, some gave him courage. One letter stood out. It was from a retired judge who wrote, "Mr. Carter, truth often moves slowly, but when it moves, it changes everything. Don't give up. You are already winning in ways the world can't yet see." The next week, a major breakthrough happened. The whistleblower who had first called James decided to testify in court anonymously. Through a voice distortion system, he explained that he had seen the real report before it was altered. "I couldn't live with the guilt," he said. "I knew what was done was wrong." His words turned the case completely. The defense had no answer for them. The judge ordered a deeper audit of the department, expanding the investigation beyond Miles to every officer who had handled similar cases. That night, James returned home exhausted. But for the first time, he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. The tide had turned. Sarah called him and said, "We did it, James. People are finally listening." He replied softly, "It's not over yet. But maybe now we're closer." In the following weeks, hearings continued. The lawyer representing James presented a detailed account of how evidence was hidden and files changed. The case grew stronger with each passing day. The people in the courtroom began to see Emily not just as a victim but as a symbol of truth and courage. Then came the most emotional day of the trial, the day James was asked to speak. He stood at the witness stand holding Emily's bracelet in his hand. The courtroom fell silent. He looked at the judge and began, "My daughter wanted to be a nurse because she believed every life mattered. She never hurt anyone. She followed the rules. And yet she never came home that night. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because truth matters. Because silence destroys families. Because no parent should have to go through what I went through. I trusted the system, but it failed her. I only want one thing, to make sure it never fails another child again." As he finished, many people in the courtroom wiped their eyes. Even the judge paused for a moment before continuing. After that day, public opinion completely shifted. The story reached every major news outlet in the country. People started calling for reforms, demanding more transparency and accountability in law enforcement. What began as one father's search for truth had become a movement for change. When the court finally adjourned for the week, James stepped outside to find hundreds of people waiting. They applauded as he walked down the steps. He didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a father who loved his daughter. But in their eyes, he had become a symbol of courage. That night he sat alone on his porch again, but this time he didn't feel alone. The world had heard Emily's story. The world cared. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "We're getting closer, sweetheart. I can feel it." As the stars glimmered above, he knew the next step would be the hardest one, the verdict. But whatever it would be, James had already kept his promise. He had brought the truth out of the shadows and into the light. And somewhere beyond that light, he believed his daughter was smiling. The fight wasn't just for justice anymore. It had become a mission for every silent voice that never got heard. James Carter, once a soldier, was now something greater, a symbol of steady hope. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. The truth had finally found its voice, and it would never be buried again. The day of the final verdict arrived like the calm before a storm. The courthouse square was filled again, just as it had been for weeks. Reporters lined the steps, microphones ready, while people from all over stood quietly holding candles and signs with Emily's name. The sky was cloudy and a cool wind brushed across the faces of the crowd. James Carter arrived early, dressed in the same dark suit he had worn at every hearing. In his pocket he carried Emily's bracelet, worn in silver, now his most precious treasure. Inside, the courtroom felt tense. Everyone waited for the judge to arrive. Sarah sat a few rows behind James, her notepad ready but her hands trembling slightly. She had covered many stories before, but none had touched her like this one. The lawyer representing James whispered, "Whatever happens today, you changed everything." James nodded, his eyes fixed forward. He wasn't thinking about winning or losing. He was thinking about Emily, her laugh, her kindness, the way she used to light up every room. He whispered to himself, "We made it, kiddo. This is for you." The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Papers rustled softly. The officer's lawyer stood tall, trying to look confident, but the weight of weeks of evidence was clear in his tired eyes. Officer Miles sat stiffly beside him, his face pale. The judge began reading. The words came slowly, every sentence heavy with meaning. The court found the officer guilty of multiple charges: falsifying reports, obstructing justice, and misconduct during an official duty. The department was also ordered to undergo a full investigation for ignoring complaints and hiding evidence. The moment the word guilty was spoken, a wave of quiet emotion filled the room. Some people cried softly. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling up. James sat still, eyes closed, breathing deeply. He didn't smile, didn't move, but a single tear rolled down his face. It was not a tear of anger. It was a tear of release, the kind that comes after months of pain and sleepless nights. When the judge finally ended the session, everyone stood up. The reporters rushed outside to break the news. James stayed behind for a moment, looking at the empty witness stand where he had spoken weeks ago. Then he turned to his lawyer and said quietly, "Thank you for believing in her." Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in applause. People cheered, hugged, and cried together. A woman shouted, "Justice for Emily!" and the words echoed down the street. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but James didn't answer any. He walked down the courthouse steps slowly, looking at the faces around him, people of every age and background standing together. Sarah reached him and said, "You did it, James. The world knows the truth now." He nodded. "We did it. Everyone who refused to give up." That evening, as the sun set, James drove to the small cemetery at the edge of town. The light was golden, falling softly over the grass. He sat down beside Emily's grave, placing a small bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers. He took out a folded paper from his pocket. It was a letter he had written the night before but hadn't read aloud until now. "Dear Emily," he began softly, "today they finally said the word I've been waiting to hear. Justice. It doesn't bring you back, but it means they saw you. They saw your truth. I kept my promise, kiddo. I told you I'd never stop until they listened. I hope you're proud. You changed more than you could ever imagine. You helped other people find their voices. I love you, and I'll keep telling your story so no one ever forgets." He sat there for a long time, letting the evening wind move gently through the trees. For the first time since that terrible night, he felt a quiet peace in his heart. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to change. The court's ruling led to new policies in the state, stricter checks on traffic stops, body camera rules, and a special unit to review complaints more fairly. Across the country, people mentioned Emily's name whenever they spoke about fairness and truth. James didn't seek fame. He avoided interviews and cameras. Instead, he began building something new, the Emily Carter Foundation. It was small at first, just a few volunteers working out of a borrowed office, but its purpose was clear: to help families who had lost loved ones and didn't know how to fight back. Sarah helped him write the foundation's story for the website. The first line read, "Truth has a voice. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to speak it." People began reaching out from across the country. Some donated money, others sent letters of support. Families shared their stories and slowly the foundation grew. James hired counselors, legal advisors, and volunteers who wanted to make a difference. Every wall in the small office had pictures of people who had found justice after years of silence. Even though James was busy, he always visited Emily's grave once a week. He told her about every new case they helped, every letter they received, and every person who thanked her name for giving them courage. "You're still helping people, sweetheart," he would whisper each time. Months passed, and one day a young girl visited his office with her mother. They had lost someone in an accident that was being ignored by the authorities. James listened carefully to their story, offering comfort and guidance. When they left, the girl handed him a small handmade card that said, "Thank you for being brave." That night, James sat by the window of his small home. The lights of the town glowed softly outside. He thought about his journey, the fear, the loneliness, the pain, and finally the peace. He realized that even though his daughter was gone, she had never truly left. Her kindness lived on in every heart she touched. Sarah visited one afternoon with some good news. "They want to honor Emily with a community award," she said, smiling. "A scholarship in her name for nursing students who want to serve with compassion." James's eyes softened. "She would have liked that," he said, helping others just like she always wanted. On the day of the ceremony, people gathered in the city hall. Photos of Emily decorated the walls, smiling, bright, and full of life. The mayor spoke briefly, then invited James to the stage. He stood at the podium, nervous but calm, looking at the crowd. "My daughter believed in kindness," he began. "She believed that no one is too small to make a difference. When she left this world, I thought my life had ended too. But I learned something. Love never ends and truth never dies. Every time we stand up for what's right, we keep that love alive." The room fell silent. Some people wiped their eyes. Others nodded quietly. James ended with the words, "If you ever feel small, remember this. One voice can move mountains." My daughter's voice still does. The audience stood and applauded. Sarah smiled through her tears. The scholarship was officially launched that day, and dozens of young nursing students applied, inspired by Emily's story. As time went on, the world began to move forward again. But the story of James and Emily Carter stayed in people's hearts. It became more than just a case. It became a lesson that truth may take time, but it always finds a way to shine through the darkness. Years later, on a quiet morning, James sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, looking out at the sunrise. The foundation was strong, the scholarship was helping students, and people still wrote to him from time to time. He smiled, remembering Emily's laugh, her bright eyes, and her words. "Dad, never give up halfway," he whispered. "I didn't, sweetheart. We made it." The wind brushed softly through the trees, carrying a warmth that felt almost like an answer. He looked up at the sky, peaceful, knowing that somewhere, his daughter's light was still shining, in every act of kindness, in every truth spoken, in every person who dared to stand up for what was right. And as the morning sun rose higher, James Carter closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled, because love, he finally understood, never ends. It only changes shape, turning pain into purpose and loss into a legacy that will live forever.